Hello, and welcome back to Let's Get Lit. In today's episode, we're going to be going over Book 6 of Paradise Lost by John Milton. So, let's continue because this is where we're going to start seeing some stories and getting some background on why exactly Satan rebelled and what his motivations were. Shall we? This book starts out with Raphael continuing where he left off from the previous book. He states that Abadel makes it back to the angels and all of the others applaud him and praise him for coming back. They take him to God, and God also praises him, saying that he was one of millions who stood up against Satan and stood for what was true and what was right. God then tells Gabriel and Michael that they're going to be leaders in the angels' army against Satan. God also says that he's going to limit the number of angels who are going to fight to equally match that Satan has. Then a mighty trumpet blares, and all of the angels that are going off to fight begin to head towards Satan and his armies. Milton makes a note that as the other angels are going to war, it's interesting to see how it's angel versus angel, because not long before everybody was together worshiping God the Almighty. But how strange it is that some seem to turn on him. Milton then says that both armies are lined up in front of each other, and that Michael, Gabriel, and Abadel are all at the front lines. Then Satan comes up to them and begins talking before the war. As Satan is looking at the armies, he sees Abadel and confronts him. Satan tells Abadel, "Oh, look at this pitiful creature who left scared with his tail between his legs." And the fact that the only reason that Abadel is fighting on God's side is because he knows that Satan will make a fool of him in front of everyone. Satan also then tells that Abadel could have stayed and gained ultimate power and knowledge, but he guesses that Abadel is just too scared of all of that. Abadel is not happy about this, and he essentially rebuttals Satan and says, "You literally talk of ultimate power and knowledge, but there's already an omnipotent being who has all of this and who's already better than you could ever be." He says it's funny that your pride has driven you to done this because you couldn't handle God's appointing someone else as his right-hand man. You're just jealous. He also goes on to say it's funny because you'll never be on God's level, which is why you couldn't be God's right-hand man. Then he says, it's funny because, Satan, you're about to learn the ultimate lesson in front of 1,000 angels. As Satan then responds and says, well, at least my angels are fighters and not some servants who just God chose to make soldiers. And that shouldn't you be off doing other things like singing songs or dancing or doing praises? This really pisses Abadel off. He essentially tells Satan that he's foolish of thinking that he could be worshipped the same as God. He says that God and nature are the same thing, and that he who rules the worthiest and excels them. He also says to worship this is pure servitude due to the fact that it's pure and it's the highest of all. He says it's very unwise to serve him who hath rebelled against his worthier adversary. He then says, Satan, you're not free. You're enthralled, and the fact that you dare to make yourself on the same playing field is just utter ridiculousness. He goes, oh, you'll rule all right, but you'll be ruling in hell, which will be your kingdom very soon. Abadel finally says, you know what? Let me serve in heaven for God, because he's divine, and because he is the worthiest to be obeyed, not you. Abadel then says, you know what? And then he lifts up his huge sword and he strikes Satan on the breastplate. No one saw this coming, and it actually recoils Satan like 10 paces back, and he ends up bended on one knee. After this, the catalyst has started and they start fighting. Milton goes on to describe the great epicness of what's going on in heaven. How angels are fighting against angels, how sometimes the fight's on solid ground, other times they're flying in the air. After a long and intense battle, Michael and Satan are fighting off against each other. And at one point, Michael tells Satan, listen, you evil, revolting, fallen angel, look what you've done to heaven. Look at all the strife and hatefulness that you yourself created, and by your inheritance who allowed it to happen. He said, how did you install so much malice into these thousands of creatures when just not long ago they were all worshiping and faithful? Michael says that heaven will cast him out for all of its confines, and the seat of bliss does not promote works of violence and war. He says, go and take you and your evil ways out of here. Go to hell where you actually belong. Satan says, oh, you don't scare me with your threats. He says, the more that you try to fight me, the more everybody else will see and will rise up to fight back against you. Just what kind of hopes are you making more to chase me out of here? He says, we'll strive for glory, which we're meant to win, and turn this heaven into a hell. He says, here, we'll make sure it rains peace for everyone. He says that meanwhile, you and your forces can go join the Almighty at his side. After this, both Michael and Satan then fly up into the air, circling each other, ready to take this fight one-on-one. As they're fighting it out, Michael's able to get his sword, and he pierces Satan's right side. When he does this, a small amount of celestial blood actually comes out. Milton mentions that God's weapons, which the angels are using, at least God's angels are using, are actually able to pierce anything, even celestial beings. Milton says that this is the first time Satan was ever able to feel pain, and this actually stuns him because he doesn't know how to react. Once he realizes that he's been cut and that he was bleeding, others of his army came to him and bore him on their shield back to the cart to have him rest. Milton says that though this doesn't take long and Satan's been healed, because angels are really not built like humans, they don't have entrails or organs or anything like that, it doesn't take them as long to recover. Milton then goes on and says that angels, as we know, don't look like humans, and they can have any amount of limbs or human features that they want, and really it's up for them to decide, whatever suits them best at that moment. He could speak of. Raphael tells Adam that there are thousands of angels which no longer have names that were in heaven, but who fell, and when an angel has fallen, their angelic name is no longer used. He said the famous angels that were fighting for God's side, he's not going to go into all of that because there's just so many to go into. He then begins to say how the fighting continues, and that once night starts to come upon them, they all agree for a truce, and at the end of the night, then in the next day, they will go ahead and again start their war. He states that the fallen angels feel tired and weary from a long day of fight. However, the angelic angels who had not fallen and who had not sinned don't feel tired or weary at all, and they don't feel any pain. Raphael then goes on to say that at night the two groups split off, and Satan with his rebellious army, and while they disappear, he begins to speak and hold counsel to his legion. Satan tells his followers that he knows that everyone's tired and that truly they've never experienced anything like this before, but that comes with higher knowledge and becoming more godlike. He says that we've learned today that though we are pierced with wounds, they will soon close and there's no possibility of mortal injury. He also says that they have to continue to fight so that way they can fight against them and at some point take control of heaven. Nirok, a fallen angel, stands up and speaks back to Satan. He essentially tells him that how are they going to stand a chance fighting in the army against other angels, because they're all pretty much on the same playing field. There is no way they can overtake them, or at least not by some just hand-to-hand combat. He suggests that maybe they should build some sort of machines or invent something with more force, so that way they're able to wound their enemy and gain advantages. Satan responds to this angel and says that is brilliant. They shall use the materials under the soil of heaven because those are darker, and uses the infernal flames, so they should in essence be stronger. Satan then declares that all of the other angels should work throughout the night to create these machines, in which they will use against their enemy come the next day. All of the fallen angels set off to work, and they worked throughout the night creating these huge monstrous machines that they're going to use in battle. Now it's the next morning, and one of the angels named Zaphiel files to the angelic warriors and warns them to get ready because today's fight is going to be a huge one. He is at the angelic angels and he tells them the foe has armed themselves for this battle. He says, make sure your hymns are tight and your grips are fast and your shields are ever close, because today is going to be like a storm, whereas yesterday was like drizzling rain. Soon the angels can see Satan and his army coming towards them with these hideous types of machines that they've never seen before. Satan then calls out to his army that if any angel wishes to trade sides, let them do so and they will not be hurt. Otherwise they shall taste the wrath of these new inventions of which they've created. Not very long after this, Satan then gives the command and the army start to advance and the machines do their job. Raphael states that soon these machines were digging up heaven's soil with large stones and rocks and catapulting them at the other angelic angel. Raphael goes on to state that many angels are knocked down due to these machines, and that the stones they used were so large the angels weren't able to get back up. At first, the angelic angels didn't know how to respond because they simply just couldn't go back to God and forfeit the war. That would be letting Satan win. So the angels were in a little bit of a pickle at this moment. Satan then asked him again, listen, if you want to join our team, you're more than welcome to, and that if you do, it won't hurt you now. One of Satan's right-hand men yelled at the angelic angels that Satan's being glorious for offering them a second chance, and they should really take it up this time. During this moment of fighting from the angels, they soon realize they have the powers that God gave them. So they literally start to pull up mountains in other part of heaven to throw them at the fallen angels. Raphael states that one mountain that was picked up was thrown onto the machines itself, burying it under all the gravels and woods and water and everything else. As the angels are fighting each other, God and his son are sitting up in heaven on their thrones, and they begin to talk to each other. God tells his son he knows that this war is going to last 3 days. He knew the angels would win the first day, and then on the second day, it'd be a little more tumultuous with all the weapons that the fallen angels have created. He also says that he knew that parts of heaven were going to be birthed up, and that he didn't want that to last too long because he didn't want heaven to become just a wasteland. And then on the third day, God is going to have his son go down and show all of his wrath that God and his son have on these fallen angels. And that it will be through him they will understand why God chose his son to be his right-hand man. He also says that he allowed this fight to happen so that way the fallen could feel pain for the first time and then realize their mistake once they've already made it. And that once they are cast down, everyone and everything in heaven or below will see his son as the true rightful heir of heaven. His son responds to him saying, Father, you are very gracious and you are very overly kind to me. He says that he is thankful for everything that his Father has done for him, and he will not let him down. The next morning comes, and the sun rides down into heaven with glorious entrance. Raphael goes on to describe the chariot and all of its beauty, along with the sights to behold as the sun is coming down. As God's sun is coming down into the heavens, he helps fight the war. He tells the good angels that now is a day of rest for them, because the enemies aren't envious of the good angels. They're not envious of them in any way. They are envious of the sun. And so he will fight them all, because God said that the sun will send punishment onto the fallen. Essentially, he basically just says, you guys take a break, I'm going to fight, I'm going to win, and they'll see that I'm stronger than all of them. At the sound of this, the fallen angels begin to fight the sun. Raphael then goes on to describe how the Son of God is able to, with thunder and half of his power, have all of the thousands of angels retreat into the heart like goats or like cattle, and how he's able to scare all of them to their core. Not long after this, soon there is a huge gap that opens up inside of heaven where they can see hell below. Then the Son of God threatens them with his great strength, and the fallen angels end up throwing themselves into the pit. Raphael states that the angels fell for 9 days into chaos, through chaos, into hell. Raphael then states that once the fallen angels have thrown themselves in the gap, the firmament closes up and everyone in heaven begins to rejoice. All of the trees and mountains and everything else fix themselves in the correct position in God's presence. Then all of the angels in the sun go back to God, and they begin to go to his throne and worship and celebrate this great triumph. Raphael ends his story here with a warning to Adam and Eve. He says the reason that he told them this story was to inform them of Satan, and how Satan has plotted to come up to the world to try and tempt man and have him follow the same footsteps that Satan has. So he wants them to be careful and to be safe. Do not be tempted, and do not listen to your temptation. He says, firm they might have stood, yet they fell. So remember and fear to transgress. He essentially says the angels stood mighty, but they also fell due to their own free will. So be careful and fear to sin against God, or you will suffer the same fate. This is where Book 6 ends. Join us next time as we go over Book 7. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, stay lit.